I had them. After they stole my life's work and left me for dead, my revenge was perfect. My children, the architects of my ruin, were about to lose everything. But as my victory was within reach, I discovered a secret that changed everything. A single piece of evidence that proved one of them wasn't a monster, but a pawn in their game. And I faced an impossible choice: complete my perfect revenge or save the only one who might still have a soul. The air in my office always smelled of old books, expensive leather, and the faint, clean scent of ozone from the servers humming one floor below. It was the smell of success, of an empire I'd built from nothing. I was a leaner Vance. Vance Innovations was like my fourth child. I created it through sleepless nights and a second mortgage, even before my real kids arrived. We were a leader in data security, a fortress for the digital secrets of the global elite. My name meant trust. A trust that I would soon learn I had extended to my family, despite my foolishness. My children, I carved my eldest, Marcus, from my ambition, but he had none of my patience. He possessed my sharp mind, but his hunger was intense and lacked restraint. He saw the company not as a legacy to nurture, but as a throne to claim. Then came Amelia. My clever, insecure Amelia. She had my strategic brain, but was forever caught in her brother's orbit, desperate for the validation he'd drip-feed her in exchange for loyalty. She wanted to be me, but she feared that she wasn't strong enough. And finally, there was Leo, my beautiful, gentle Leo, the artist, the soul of our family. He had no interest in boardrooms or profit margins. His world was one of color and emotion. I always saw him as precious. I wanted to protect him from the harsh world I lived in. His siblings were eager to conquer it. I thought his distance from the business kept him safe. I was innocent enough to believe it made him untouchable. I'd spent 30 years building Vance Innovations. I trusted Marcus and Amelia completely, grooming them to one day take the reins. I made them executives, gave them shares, and included them in every key decision. I saw their eagerness as passion, their impatience as drive. I was a proud mother, watching her legacy take root. That pride blinded me to the rot growing under the surface. It made me ignore the whispers in the hallways. They would stop when I got near. I noticed the sudden quiet phone calls and how Marcus looked at me in meetings. It wasn't with respect. Instead, it felt like he was sizing me up for demolition. The betrayal wasn't one dramatic event. It was a slow poisoning, a campaign of 1,000 cuts. It started small. A key client call excluded me without my knowledge. Marcus redirected a crucial project in a way that shifted it from my vision to his. Amelia started presenting my long-term strategies back to me as her fresh ideas, her face a mask of earnestness that I now recognize as brazen theft. I felt a growing chill in the company I had built to be my family's hearth. When I confronted them, they were masters of gaslighting. "You're stressed, Mom," Marcus would say, his hand on my shoulder feeling less like a comfort and more like a restraint. "You should take a step back, let us handle the day-to-day." Amelia would nod, her eyes wide with fake concern. "We're trying to help, we love you." They used my love for them as a weapon, turning my concern into proof of my supposed decline. A harsh simplicity marked the final act. They planned a corporate retreat in the mountains. It was my idea, actually, a last-ditch effort to fix the strange new fractures between us. Marcus insisted on driving me up himself. "Like old times," he'd said, with a smile that never reached his cold, calculating eyes. I remember the conversation in the car. It was all about legacy. I spoke of a gradual transition. He spoke of a new era, a bold new direction. He said the company needed to shed its old skin to survive. I didn't realize he meant me. The accident was chillingly precise. A sharp turn on a remote mountain pass, the sickening screech of tires, the lurch of the car as it left the road. It wasn't a violent crash, but a controlled slide down an embankment, just enough to injure, not to kill. I remember the jolt as my head hit the window. Through a haze of pain, I saw Marcus get out of the car, unscathed and impassive. He looked down at me, not with panic, but with assessment. He checked his watch. Then he walked away, leaving me for dead. I woke up to the sterile scent of antiseptic. But this wasn't a hospital. It was a private, unlisted clinic, the kind the powerful use to disappear. A man I didn't recognize informed me I was lucky to be alive. He also told me that, according to the world, I wasn't. Eleanor Vance was tragically lost in a hiking accident. There was a memorial. My children wept. Marcus gave a heart-wrenching eulogy to the woman who gave him everything. Amelia stood beside him, a perfect picture of grief. Even Leo, my sweet Leo, was there, his face shattered. Seeing his genuine pain in the news clip they showed me was the first crack in my hardening heart. The legal documents were flawless. My signature, expertly forged, was signed over my entire company to Marcus and Amelia. Another forgery activated a clause in my will, declaring me legally dead. They had thought of everything. They hadn't stolen my company. They de-stolen my life. They buried me alive under a mountain of paperwork and lies. For weeks, I drifted in and out of consciousness, my body healing while my mind replayed that final, cold look on my son's face. The shock curdled into grief, and then the grief began to burn. It burned away the love, the shock, the tears. And in its place, something cold, patient, and completely merciless began to grow. They thought they had buried Alina Vance. They were wrong. They had just planted the seeds of their destruction. My prison was comfortable, but my captors made one fatal mistake. They left me with my mind. In that silent, sterile room, I began to rebuild myself, not as Alina Vance the mother, but as nemesis. I watched the financial news like a hawk. I saw Marcus and Amelia at press conferences, announcing a new, aggressive direction for my company. They wore my legacy like a stolen coat, and the world applauded them. Every glowing article about their dynamic leadership was another log on the fire of my fury. The turning point came as a whisper. A kind nurse with tired eyes smuggled in a phone one evening. "Your friend is very persistent," she said, placing it in my hand. "He's been calling for a month, asking for a patient who doesn't exist." The contact name on the screen was one word: Julian. Julian Croft was my former head of security, a man whose loyalty I never doubted. Ex-military, with a mind like a steel trap, I'd retired him with a generous pension years ago, but we'd stayed close. He was the only one who knew the codes to my safe and my deepest contingency plans. My children saw him as a relic. They underestimated him. They underestimated our bond. I sent a coded message we'd established years ago. The phoenix requires a new nest. 48 hours later, I was gone. Julian's extraction was seamless. A faked medical transfer, a quiet exit through a service corridor, and I was speeding away. I looked at my reflection in the window. The woman staring back was gaunt, with new lines of coldness etched around her eyes. The forgiving mother was gone. In her place was a queen in exile, plotting her return. Julian had set up a new life for me. A quiet apartment, new ID, and access to offshore accounts my children knew nothing about, a fortune they couldn't touch. He became my hands and eyes, my loyal field marshal. "What's the plan, Alina?" he asked, his voice a steady rock. A slow, cold smile spread across my face. "The plan? They took my company. They took my name. I'm going to take everything from them. I won't just defeat them, Julian. I will dismantle them, piece by piece. I'll turn their strengths into weaknesses and their love for each other into a weapon. They will be the architects of their ruin. I will simply provide the blueprints." My revenge wouldn't be swift. It would be a masterpiece of strategy, a corporate siege fought from the shadows. I called it my three-phase plan: isolation, erosion, and annihilation. I knew my children's fatal flaws. Marcus's arrogance was his flaw. Amelia's insecurity was hers. Through his network, Julian planted the seeds. We started with Amelia. She craved respect and wanted to be seen as Marcus's equal. I had Julian create a fake headhunting firm, Argentum Associates. They approached Amelia for a confidential CEO position at a rival company. The offer was prestigious, tailored perfectly to her ambitions. They flattered her, told her the industry saw her as the true visionary, held back by her brother. She took the bait. She started taking secret meetings and hiding calls from Marcus. At the same time, I went after Marcus. His arrogance made him a sucker for flattery. We created a profile for a beautiful, brilliant financial analyst who connected with him online. She praised his bold moves, feeding his ego and criticizing my outdated methods. He became infatuated, not with her, but with the version of himself she reflected back at him. He started sharing confidential information to impress her. Every scrap of data was forwarded directly to me. The wedge was in. Amelia, paranoid that Marcus was consolidating power, began building her alliances. Marcus, blinded by ego, saw her maneuvering as disloyalty. The trust between them, the foundation of their coup, began to crack. With my children turning on each other, it was time to attack the empire itself. Vance Innovations' greatest strength was its reputation for impenetrable security. I built that fortress. I knew all the secret passages. Using the intel Marcus was so generously providing, we launched a series of surgical strikes. We set up a ghost company, Acheron Security, and started competing for their contracts. Acheron had no history, but it had me. I knew Vance's bidding strategies, their pricing, and their clients' biggest fears. When Vance bid on a big contract with a Swiss bank, Acheron submitted a lower bid. They also gave a presentation that highlighted vulnerabilities I alone could know about. We won. Then we won another, and another. Marcus and Amelia were hemorrhaging clients to a competitor that seemed to know their every move. Panic set in. They launched an internal investigation, hunting for a mole, never suspecting the ghost was their mother. Marcus was sure Amelia was leaking information. Amelia was certain Marcus's recklessness was to blame. Next, I went after their supply chain. Vance relied on a specific supplier for their microprocessors. I knew the owner. I had helped him get his first big loan 30 years ago. A single anonymous phone call was all it took. I didn't ask him to break his contract. I simply reminded him of the value of true loyalty. 2 months later, unforeseen production issues led to huge shipment delays for Vance. This hurt their ability to fill orders. Their stock price faltered. The press, once their cheerleaders, started asking questions. I read the articles in my quiet apartment, a grim satisfaction settling over me. They were feeling the first tremors of the earthquake I was building. The final piece was personal. They were planning a huge 20th anniversary gala for the company, their coronation. It was the perfect stage for my final act. Julian gathered intel on every investor, board member, and journalist who would be in that room. I wasn't just going to ruin my children's finances. I was going to incinerate their reputations in a single, fiery spectacle. My plan was perfect. A flawless machine thundering toward a devastating conclusion. I had accounted for every variable, or so I thought. It was 2 weeks before the gala. The final phase, annihilation, was ready. My apartment was a command center, plastered with charts, projections, and photos of the people I was about to destroy. The evidence was compiled into a slick, damning video presentation, ready to be broadcast across every screen at the gala. It would leave no doubt. Marcus and Amelia would be ruined before the first glass of champagne was poured. I was reviewing the final financial records when I noticed Julian had gone quiet. He was staring at his monitor, his brow furrowed in confusion. "What is it, Julian?" I asked, my voice sharp. "It's about Leo," he said slowly. "It doesn't make sense." My heart, which I thought had turned to stone, gave a painful lurch. "What about him?" "Look," he said, turning his screen. "Here are the initial transfers to fund the holding company, one from Marcus, one from Amelia, and one from Leo's trust fund. That's how they got his compliance." "I know that," I said impatiently. "He's as guilty as they are. His signature is on everything." "Yes," Julian said, pointing to another window. "But look at this. These are Leo's personal bank statements. For the last 6 months, he's been making 2 large, identical withdrawals every month. On those same days, Marcus and Amelia each get a large, identical deposit. He's paying them." I stared at the screen. "What are you talking about? Why would they blackmail him for money they already stole?" Julian kept digging, his fingers flying across the keyboard. He pulled up encrypted texts from one of Amelia's old phones. A conversation between her and Marcus. "Marcus, is he still being difficult?" "Amelia, he's threatening to go to Mom again. He says he can't do it." "Marcus, remind him what happens if he does. Remind him about Sarah Jenkins. Send him the photos. He'll fall in line. He signs or his perfect little art career goes up in smoke." Sarah Jenkins. The name hit me like a punch to the gut. A girl from Leo's university. A tragic accident at a party, a fall. It was ruled an accident, but Leo had been destroyed by it, blaming himself. I had comforted him through weeks of nightmares. Julian found the file they were referencing. Photos. photos that told a different story. It wasn't a clear-cut accident. Leo was there arguing with her, but the context was missing, twisted by his siblings. They had taken a tragic moment from his youth, a moment of grief and confusion, and turned it into a weapon. They convinced him the photos would make him look like a monster, that they would ruin him. And there it was, the final, awful truth. Leo wasn't a conspirator. He was their first victim. They didn't just need his money, they needed his silence. They used his deepest shame to chain him to their plot. His signature wasn't greed, it was desperation. That shattered look on his face at my memorial, it wasn't just grief for me. It was the face of a trapped soul. My perfect revenge suddenly felt ugly. Crude. My plan was a sledgehammer that would crush Leo along with the monsters who had tormented him. It would paint him with the same brush, leaving him in the rubble. The rage that had sustained me for months flickered, replaced by an agonizing conflict. To proceed meant sacrificing the only innocent one. To stop meant my perfect revenge would be compromised. Marcus and Amelia might escape the public annihilation they deserved. Justice for Leo was at war with vengeance for myself. For 2 days, I didn't sleep. I paced the apartment, surrounded by the evidence of my children's evil. Was this about my company, or was it about punishing the guilty? And what is justice if it destroys the innocent? The cold shell I had built around my heart began to crack, and the old, agonizing love for my youngest son flooded back in. I couldn't save the boy he was, but maybe I could give him a chance to be the man he was meant to become. On the morning of the gala, I made my decision. My revenge would no longer be perfect. It would be just. "Julian," I said, my voice steady for the first time in days. "Scrap the video, we're changing the plan." The new plan was surgical, more complex, and in its way far more cruel. An hour before the gala, couriers delivered 2 data drives. One of the drives was delivered to one of the top investigative journalists at the city's leading paper. The other was delivered to the head of the corporate fraud division at the SEC. The drives contained everything: the forgeries, the fraudulent transfers, the backdoor deals. Their financial ruin was now a quiet, bureaucratic certainty. But I still had a role to play. I needed to see their faces. I arrived at the gala not as a specter, but as a ghost. Julian got me an invitation under a false name. I wore a simple black dress, my face subtly altered. I slipped into the grand ballroom, a ghost at my funeral feast. Marcus was on stage, basking in the spotlight. Amelia stood beside him, smiling, but I saw the tension in her shoulders. The room was full of the powerful and the influential, all of them oblivious. I let him finish his speech. I let the applause wash over him. Then, as the lights came up, I moved. I walked calmly toward the stage. A murmur went through the crowd as people started to recognize me. The whispers grew to gasps. I reached the stairs to the stage. Marcus and Amelia turned. Their faces froze. The color drained from Marcus's face, his arrogant smile melting into a mask of pure shock. Amelia looked like she had seen a ghost, her hand flying to her mouth. I didn't shout. I simply looked up at them, my voice carrying across the suddenly silent room. "Hello, children." Chaos erupted. Before security could reach me, I addressed the stunned board members in the front row. "My children have been overzealous," I said, my voice calm, filled with a chilling maternal authority. "They have made mistakes, but the legacy of Vance Innovations is stronger than any individual. I have already taken steps to correct their errors with the proper authorities. The company will be saved. I will see to it personally." I turned their coronation into their public execution, but I did it as a CEO, seizing control to protect the legacy. But what about Leo? My final act was for him alone. While I was at the gala, another courier delivered a package to Leo's apartment. It contained no note. It contained only one thing, a copy of the blackmail file, the photos, the texts between Marcus and Amelia. Everything he needed to understand that he was a victim, not a monster. I didn't save him. I gave him the weapons to save himself. In the aftermath, Marcus and Amelia were arrested. The scandal was immense, but with my return, I stabilized the company. Rebuilding it is a long road, but the empire is mine again. I haven't seen Leo. A week after the gala, his lawyer contacted mine. He's suing his siblings for extortion and emotional distress. He's fighting his own battle on his terms. Maybe one day he'll be ready to see me. Maybe he'll understand that I had to destroy our family to save him, or maybe he never will. My revenge wasn't perfect. It was messy, painful, and incomplete. I didn't get the clean victory I craved in the darkness. Instead, I learned a bitter truth. True justice isn't about balancing the scales, it's about protecting what's precious, no matter the cost. They left me with nothing, but in the end, I chose to save the one thing that still had value. I left them to the truth, and I was left with the ashes of my empire and the faint, fragile hope of a son I might one day see again. So, what would you have done? Would you have pursued the perfect revenge, knowing it would destroy an innocent person in the process? Or would you have changed course, sacrificing that flawless victory for a different kind of justice? I'd be interested to read what you think in the comments. If you enjoy stories about betrayal and the complicated path to redemption, make sure you subscribe. There are always more secrets waiting to be uncovered.